In fact, for more on the story and some questions around other related matters, let's speak to Sherwin Bryce Pease now. Sherwin, the U.S. engaged in somewhat of a proxy war with Iran based on Israeli intelligence and Benjamin Netanyahu's insistence that weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, are being developed in Iran. We saw those 3 strikes on what was supposedly the development sites for those weapons. And Trump has now, for a second time, threatened some form of military intervention in Iran. Back and forth over the last couple of days. What's the latest and where do we stand now?
Well, I'll tell you, Oliver, first what the UN Secretary General has said. He says that he's urging Iranian authorities to exercise maximum restraint and to refrain from unnecessary or disproportionate use of force. The reports we are seeing is estimates that the death toll is between 500 and over 2,000. Difficult to verify because there's been an internet and communications blackout. But there was this warning, right, that prefaced the rhetoric you're now hearing from the United States. The president of the U.S., Donald Trump, posting on Truth Social a few days ago that Iran is looking at freedom perhaps like never before. The U.S. stands ready to help, and had indicated that a red line would be if the Iranian authorities started killing protesters. I reached out to an Iranian colleague of mine, a journalist who works for BBC Persia, Oliver, and I said to him, just sort of paint a picture for me about what's going on the ground. He has more access, he has more contacts on the ground. So that's kind of the thinking behind talking to him. And he said this to me: "We have seen the regime kill before, but even for a nation used to suffering from the state's brute force, this level of naked, intentional violence has been a shock." And so, as we prefaced in that report, the president of the U.S. will be briefed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, essentially the head of the U.S. military, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, tomorrow. And they are looking at a variety of options. But the Wall Street Journal at this hour is also reporting, Oliver, that several presidential aides in the White House, including J.D. Vance, the vice president, are urging a diplomatic off-ramp rather than a military escalation here. They want the president to engage, as the Iranians have opened a window of opportunity here to talk about Iran's nuclear program, but also to discuss this in a diplomatic theater rather than a military one. But these are some of the things that President Donald Trump is currently weighing. But as you have seen in Venezuela, he has certainly asserted himself militarily on the international front. No less in Iran, as you mentioned, those 3 nuclear strikes in June last year. So 7 months later, we seem to be back to US-Iran 2.0.
Yeah. And of course, seemingly every diplomatic issue across the world seems to, however, affect South Africa, whether directly or indirectly. And this is one such instance as well. Now, you're hearing some stuff about conversations between Iran and South Africa pertaining to its BRICS naval operations off of the coast of the Western Cape in Simonstown. What are you hearing?
We can confirm that a diplomatic outreach from the South African government through the BRICS format, right? This is an operation, a Navy military drill that is being hosted in South Africa, but being led by China. And so essentially this is China's drill that is being hosted by South Africa. So there have been some reporting about how South Africa maneuvered in terms of articulating its position here. But what we have confirmed from a very well-placed government source, Oliver, is that South Africa asked Iran to withdraw, and they've acquiesced to that request. And the explanation we are receiving is that there's a multifaceted approach at play here in terms of South Africa not wanting to escalate tensions, already very escalated tensions between Washington and Pretoria. No less, given the arrest of 7 Kenyans that were processing potential refugees to the United States last year. And so lots of things bubbling under the surface in this relationship. But also very much an important one is the fact that the House of Representatives today could vote on a 3-year extension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And South Africa has been lobbying very vociferously and vigorously to remain a beneficiary of the preferred status under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So that vote coming up in the House of Representatives, of course, that is a beginning of a process. It will then have to go to the Senate. There will be debate in the Senate, and then, of course, to the White House. The question then becomes, does AGOA override, if South Africa were to be included in AGOA, does that then override the 30% tariff that has been imposed through executive order by the U.S. president? And I can tell you, AGOA's extension, if South Africa is included, will be moot unless that executive order is rescinded by the White House. So that 30% tariff will remain. But let me add another caveat. The U.S. Supreme Court, it could rule on Wednesday. We're expecting another opinion day from the U.S. Supreme Court where these very reciprocal tariffs are front and center. They will rule on the legality of them. So the court could strike them down. Then does AGOA then kick in if South Africa is all included? These are all the questions we continue to have.
Yeah, and these are all domestic issues in the U.S. that seemingly affecting the rest of the world, albeit that the tariff executive order has, of course, international effect. But another domestic issue that could affect the global economy is the onslaught on the Federal Reserve, and that is Donald Trump's, the Department of Justice taking on a case against Jerome Powell, who's the Fed chair. And Donald Trump doesn't have a great relationship with Jerome Powell. What's going on there?
I think we have a clip of Jerome Powell sort of responding, Oliver, just this unprecedented moment where a Fed chair coming out as he did, guns blazing last night, essentially revealing that the Justice Department had sent subpoenas to the Federal Reserve in relation to overruns in renovations at a number of Fed buildings, which Jerome Powell articulated in that statement that he had been engaging Congress with. I think if we have the clip.
Yeah, we certainly do. Let's take a look at what Jerome Powell said.
On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned, in part, a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Sherwin, I want to go back to that very awkward joint press briefing between Jerome Powell and Donald Trump several months ago, where Donald Trump spoke about these overruns. Jerome Powell said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Donald Trump said, yeah, we have experts who looked at it, presented him with a piece of paper, and it turns out Donald Trump was reading the thing twice over and not actually the exact invoice that was before him. Is that the overruns we're talking about here?
That's what they're talking about. And I'll tell you this, Donald Trump in December, late last year, 29th of December, I believe it was, from Mar-a-Lago, stated that they would be suing Jerome Powell about the cost overruns. But NBC reporting that when the president was questioned whether he knew about the DOJ subpoena of the Federal Reserve, Donald Trump said he knew nothing about it. So, but you know, there seems to be a link there, a tenuous one at best, at worst, but certainly a link there. But what Jerome Powell is saying, essentially, Netanyahu's position is Jerome Powell in the United States, for people who are wondering. And what he's saying is that this is a pretext for the pressure that had been exerted on the Federal Reserve, no less on Jerome Powell, but also Governor Lisa Cook. You'll recall that there was a governor that Trump's DOJ has accused of mortgage fraud, and he then sought to remove her from her position, but she has challenged that. Of course, she's disputing the charge, but she has challenged that in the courts, and so the courts have blocked the federal government or the president from removing her, and that is also a matter that will be ventilated in the Supreme Court, I believe, before the end of this month. And so there has been this pressure campaign on this agency, the Federal Reserve, that is essentially supposed to operate independently of presidential pressure, independently of political or congressional pressure, because what they do is they take a long-term view of what the economy is doing based on the data, and then making monetary policy decisions, including whether to raise or decrease interest rates every 6 weeks. And you've seen this unrelenting pressure campaign from President Trump on Jerome Powell for interest rates to be lowered very quicker. And so he is making a direct link between that pressure campaign and the subpoena that has been issued to the Federal Reserve by the U.S. attorney in that district near D.C.
Yeah. Sherwin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really do appreciate it. Sherwin Bryce Pease, SABC correspondent, coming to us live there. We're going to take a break. We'll continue on the other side of this.